What does this airplane, and this airplane all have in common? Let's find out on Celebrating Aviation with Mike Mashat. What these three airplanes have in common is they were originally called DC jets. And today, they're called MD series or Mad Dogs. Before we get into it, I should mention this is the fourth episode of a series on the Douglas airliners. And if you missed these, I have links to these episodes in the title block below. But before we get into the story, let's start at the beginning. Let's look at some history. It all centers around this man, the legendary Donald Wills Douglas, who started his company in 1921 and built an empire manufacturing airliners. And there was an entire family of Douglas airliners, starting from top, the DC-3 in the 1930s, the DC-4 in the 1940s, the late 40s, DC-6, and the 1950s, DC-7. There was a time when more than half of all the airliners flying throughout the world were built in Santa Monica by the Douglas Aircraft Company. In 1955, the company envisioned their first jet airliner, and that was great. It was a tremendous sign of progress. There was just one minor little problem. Boeing had had an airplane in the air for more than a year, the revolutionary 367-80 prototype jet transport. Douglas was behind the game. By the time their DC-8 rolled out in 1958 at Long Beach, the Boeing 707 airliners had been in service already with Pan American, TWA, and American Airlines. The DC-8 went into service in 1959, and it became a popular airplane. More than 500 were built. The ultimate version, the DC-8-63, seen here, of the first generation series, featured a stretched fuselage with a 250 passenger capacity, improved wing, and modified engine nacelles and pylons, which gave the airplane tremendous performance. On the Twinjet side, the first Twinjet airliner in the world was the Soviet Tupolev Tu-104, which established the first sustained jet transport service in Europe. In 1957, the French Caravelle, and in 1961, the British BAC-111 entered the market as the Twinjet airliners of that time. And in 1965, Douglas joined the game with the DC-9. Today, this would be considered a regional jet, a 100-passenger twin jet with a T-tail, but it was a revolutionary airplane in 1965. The airplane grew in size. The DC-9 30, the 40 and 50 series all had stretched fuselages for increased passenger capacity, upgraded engines, and improvements throughout the airplane. In April of 1967, the McDonnell Corporation merged with Douglas Aircraft. And here's a question for you. How many all-new, meaning clean sheet of paper, McDonnell Douglas aircraft entered series production from 1967 with the McDonnell merger to 1997 with the Boeing merger? We'll tell you the answer a little later in the program. But to put that in perspective, let's take a look at some of the McDonnell Douglas airplanes that happened in that 30-year span. The first McDonnell Douglas airliner was the DC-10, which entered service in 1971. This was Douglas's first twin-aisle wide-body jetliner, which carried 250 passengers and was powered by three 40,000-pound thrust General Electric CF6 or Pratt & Whitney JT9D high bypass ratio turbofans. 6 years later, a new DC-9 arrived, the DC-9 Super 80. I was just hired in as a staff illustrator. I did the title on this magazine. So DC-9 Super 80, where did that name come from? Well, the original designation was DC-9 55. But our president, John Brizendine, coined the phrase a super airplane for the 1980s. And this became the DC-9 Super 80. The airplane rolled out of the paint shop seen here. This is fuselage number 909 We called it Ship 1. And it came out of the paint shop on Monday, May 28th, 1979. It was to be a joyous occasion, but it became a dark time for the company. 3 days earlier, in Chicago, an American Airlines DC-10 was lost in an accident, and it became the first of 3 DC-10s that were lost in only 5 months that year. It was a turning point for the company. What you don't see in this photo are the news helicopters hovering above and all the TV news vans parked on Lakewood Boulevard off to the left. But what's significant is the airplane in the background. That's a brand new British Caledonian DC-10 Series 30 that had rolled out that weekend. And you notice that the name of the airline is papered over. And this was symbolic of a very turbulent time for the company and an interesting time to introduce a new jet. What started to happen was a rebranding from the McDonnell Corporation in St. Louis. And the first thing to change was the Douglas sign. This is an iconic sign originally at LAX at the Douglas facility there in El Segundo, but it was moved to Long Beach in the 1960s, and it is preserved today as a historic landmark, but we'll get into that in a moment. The first effort to rebrand the company and the airplanes that it built were changing the sign from Fly Douglas to Fly DC Jets. Let me go back. Take a look, D-O-U. The O became the C, the U became the J, and so on. And they actually chopped those letters and restructured the sign to read DC Jets. This is the way it appears today. The new sign worked its way into all sorts of corporate literature and illustrations, like the R.G. Smith rendering for the executive calendars. But the DC-9 went on to become a success. When first introduced into U.S. airline service by California carrier PSA, the Super 80 was a revolutionary airplane, and it was the quietest jetliner in the sky, as well as the most efficient. It was an instant hit with domestic and international airlines, and the Super 80 won fans among flight crews and passengers alike. The DC-9 82 and 83 variants soon followed. The MD-83, which was launched by Alaska Airlines, was the long-range member of the Super 80 family, with a nearly 3,000-mile range and uprated Pratt & Whitney JT8D 219 engines. Furthering the rebranding, Chicago-based ad agency J. Walter Thompson generated a series of ads in 1983 that featured the first use of the new MD designation for McDonnell Douglas instead of DC for Douglas Commercial. In 1988, the JT8D 219 power plants were fitted to yet another version of the MD-80, built specifically for Delta Airlines, the MD-88. This was the first model to have an FMS and EFIS-equipped cockpit, digital features that were eventually retrofitted to earlier models of the airplane. The ultimate stretch DC-9, the MD-90, represented the end of the line for the MD series twinjets. Its fuselage was 4.2 feet longer than the MD-80, allowing for up to 150 passengers in typical mixed-class service. The MD-90 was powered by 22,000-pound thrust International Aero Engines V2500 turbofans, giving it good hot and high field performance with a range of more than 2,700 miles. Let's take a look at the DC-9 family, starting with the classic DC-9 10 and 20 series, the stretch DC-9 30, and then the new generation Super 80 family, as I still call it to this day, and the MD-90. Well, what was missing was the improved version of the shorter airplane. And here we have the DC-9 Super 30, a rendering that I did in 1982. This became the Super 90. And what it was a DC-9 30 fuselage equipped with Super 80 wing, engines, and tailplane. In 1986, the MD-87 emerged from that DC-9 Super 30 proposal, combining the 119-foot fuselage of the DC-9 30 with improved engines, and as mentioned, the wings and tailplanes of the MD-80 series. The MD-87 carried 130 passengers over routes of 2,500 miles. And several of these airplanes are serving today as privately owned VIP executive aircraft and, believe it or not, water bombers for fighting California wildfires. Launched to fill the technological gap between the newer MD-80 and the classic DC-9 series was an airplane called the McDonnell Douglas MD-95. After Boeing's merger in 1997, however, the name was changed to fit into Boeing's lineup size-wise between the 707 and 727. Now, according to Boeing historical archival information, let me clear up some misunderstandings, perhaps. The Model 717 designation was originally applied to the KC-135 Stratotanker and the all-cargo version, the C-135 Stratolifter, in the mid-1950s. This designation was brought back for the new addition to the Boeing jetliner family, the 717. Wait a minute, I have a better picture of the KC-135. Yeah, that's more like it. You didn't think I was going to do a video without a model box top, did you? Despite having the same fuselage length as the DC-930, the 717 was a rather unique aircraft that did not integrate well into existing fleets of other MD-80 series airplanes. This was due to its fully digital cockpit and BMW Rolls-Royce BR715 turbofans. These engines produced 19,000 pounds of thrust each, giving the 134-passenger jet truly spectacular performance. And 717 operators today include Delta, Hawaiian, and Qantas Link, among others. Well, that took care of the DC-9 family. What about the DC-10? It too went through iterations. Let's take a look. The first version to be applied to the DC-10 family as a variant was the DC-10 Twin. Obviously, they removed the number 2 engine from the tail, shortened the fuselage, but there was one problem. In the early 1970s, ETOPS, or extended twin operations over water, had not been established yet, meaning you couldn't fly a twin-engine airplane over water. This was a handicap. But how did that work out? Well, shout out to my good friend Mike Chu, excellent photographer, airliner enthusiast, took this beautiful shot of an Airbus A330 in Hawaiian Airlines markings at SFO. And ETOPS operations have advanced today to where twin-engine airplanes are flying amazingly long routes all over the world. Douglas missed an opportunity. As for stretching the DC-10, those concepts began as early as 1973. I did this rendering in 1978. Now we're showing odd parts of the airplane, additions like winglets, a flow-through number 2 nacelle, and so on. By 1979, the idea of a family of stretch DC-10s had evolved, and this was modeled after what happened with the DC-8, a stretch fuselage on an existing wing and engine, a stretch fuselage on an advanced wing and engine, and a shorter fuselage, longer range version of the 63 model, just like the DC-8s. Again, I did some renderings. This is a Series 61 at what we call Anywhere USA Airport. The long range 62 over New York. And this evolved into the MD-EE. You got to hand it to the marketing guys. They love changing the names. EE, what did that stand for? Well, efficiency, economy, and ecology. This was starting to become a factor in aircraft design. Winglets were first used in 1981 in a test program on a leased Continental DC-10 Series 10. And the winglets were then applied to what became the final iteration for the stretch DC-10, the MD-100, in 1962. That is the actual winglet that was flown on the Continental airplane, painted in the MD-100 colors. We called it the Purple Monster color scheme. And that's me standing there ogling the winglet in the classic Aviation Week pose, as I like to call it. And this is in the Product Display Center at Long Beach. I was assigned to the MD-100 program in 1983, and it was really a high point in my career at Douglas. You can see the big display in the back, done by our presentations group. And gee, I wonder what that model would be going for on eBay today. Well, in October of 1983, the UAW went on strike and the program was canceled. It was resurrected again in 1986 and became what is now known as the MD-11. Key improvements of the MD-11 over the DC-10 included a two-pilot, fully digital glass cockpit and avionics, upgraded 62,000-pound thrust GE CF680C2 or Pratt & Whitney PW4460 turbofans, the winglets that I showed you, and a 20-foot fuselage stretch, allowing for up to 405 passengers for military charters. Dedicated freighter versions were planned as well. This is an airbrush rendering. Our airbrush group would apply airline markings to a generic airframe, and these were used for promotion and for sales. I did this painting for Delta, showing their MD-11 before it was in service, flying in formation with the 767, the Spirit of Delta. The airplane entered service January of 1990 with Finnair, and other operators included American. Let's take a look at actually the MD-11 operators. The U.S. domestic operators were seen here: American, World, Delta, UPS, FedEx, and Western Global. But notice that the international carriers outnumbered that 2-1. KLM made the last passenger flight of an MD-11 on October 26, 2014. But today, Federal Express is still flying the airplane, although they are being retired as we speak. And there was another variant to mention too, the MD-10. This was for cockpit commonality. They literally grafted MD-11 cockpit structure into a DC-10 freighter and created a unique airplane for Federal Express. Was there ever an MD-12? I'm glad you asked. Originating from the same global airline marketing studies that led to the double-deck 600-passenger Airbus A380 Super Jumbo, the MD-12 was McDonnell Douglas's attempt to capture a share of that anticipated market. For a host of reasons, this short-lived program never made it off the drawing board. But this impressive artwork was created by my friend, noted Los Angeles illustrator Ken Hodges. Well, the airplane made it to Aviation Week, but look at the dates here. This is March of 1992. 4 engines, double decks mark all new MD-12 design. Pretty optimistic. A month later, Douglas plans shorter double deck MD-12. Really? And a month later, another article, more changes. In July, 2 months later, the headline that spelled doom for the program and was an indication of how things were happening at the company. Quick changes in MD-12 plans damage Douglas's credibility. Well, guess what? The program was canceled a year later, bringing down the curtain on all new aircraft development at the Douglas Aircraft Company Long Beach plant. Final delivery of an MD-11 was February 22nd. Final delivery of the Boeing 717 was May 23rd, 2006. Let's look at some production numbers, and this is really amazing. You're not going to believe this. These are the aircraft produced in each of the series: DC-8, 9, MD-80s family, DC-10, including the KC-10 tanker, and MD-11. The total is 3,641 DAC jetliners, Douglas Aircraft Company. Are you sitting down? Take a look at that number and look at this. As of March 2023, last month, 10,800 Airbus A320s have been built, and a staggering 11,400 Boeing 737s have been built. Kind of puts things in perspective. So, how many all-new, clean sheet of paper McDonnell Douglas aircraft entered series production from 1967 to 1997? Believe it or not, only one. All right, I know I said DC-10 was the first McDonnell Douglas airliner, but it began as a Douglas program in 1966, a twin-engine study for an airplane dedicated for American Airlines to operate as a 250-passenger transport from New York's LaGuardia Airport. This was a Douglas airplane in the beginning. So what does that mean? The one and only airplane created in 30 years as a new from-scratch aircraft, not a derivative, was the C-17 Globemaster III. As mentioned, the Boeing merger in 1997, Boeing took their logo type and married it with the Globe and SST and orbital rocket to create their new logo. And there you have it, a look at the MD or Mad Dog family of airliners that brought the curtain down on the Douglas Aircraft Company aircraft production. Special thanks to my dear friend Jeff Thomas, the Museum of Flying, and the Douglas Library and Archive for contributing to this program and allowing me to bring programs like this to you. Thank you so much for celebrating aviation with Mike Machat. I appreciate your watching. Would love to have you on board as a subscriber. And please do hit the like button on the way out. That helps us with YouTube. Until next time, take care.